Hey there guys, today we're taking a look at Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 Remastered running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U, this time with 8GB of RAM. Now the game is currently running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are at the stock 15-watt TDP right here at the full 1080p resolution. Now the level of performance that we're getting out of this is actually not too bad. Certainly nothing impressive, certainly nothing remarkable, but it is decent levels of performance with 1% lows that are just slightly under 40. It pretty much means that we are at a decent enough range to be able to play this game comfortably enough. And once we move into more interior areas, that's when the FPS average can really start to boost up. Of course, if you're on a map where things are just more open, then your FPS is going to be a bit lower, but it's not going to be to a range where I think it gets to be unplayable. It's pretty much perfectly acceptable at the level that it's at, and honestly, I was really happy to see how it was performing here. But of course, this is just at the stock 15-watt TDP. If you are on a system that lets you actually raise the TDP, or if using a program like the AMD APU tuning utility actually allows you to, you can try to boost the TDP up to 25 watts to see if that will boost the overall performance. And let's take a look at what that does at 1080p for us. At 1080p, really raising the TDP doesn't do a significant amount for us in terms of boosting our FPS or 1% lows. We're talking about a 1 to 2 FPS difference in a lot of situations, and that's all within margin of error. So raising the TDP in this game doesn't necessarily do too much. We just get kind of slightly higher averages and sometimes slightly higher 1% lows. Really something that I think you're going to have a tough time really noticing a lot of the time. It's certainly going to be, at least on paper, a nicer experience, and I'm sure any moments that would have caused stutter, you're going to be able to avoid those now. But those situations are very rare, to the point where I feel like if you're going to be playing the game for most of the time, it's going to be very consistent. In both scenarios, 1% lows were just completely fine, and our frame time charts show us that there are no major spikes in either setting. Though in the interior areas here, you will see that the FPS will start to actually boost up a little bit higher. But again, it's going to be at a range that I think that the vast majority of people aren't really going to notice or care too much. So I was more than happy with the result that we got here. Of course, if you're trying to maximize your FPS here, you might be interested in dropping the resolution down to 720p. As you can see here, we can actually get some really nice FPS numbers. Just going in from the exterior into the interior area here, you can see that the averages that we're hitting are actually pretty remarkable. We're starting to get into the 80s range, while inside our FPS can reach almost all the way up to 200 FPS. Our 1% lows are almost at 50. In certain areas of the game, this just feels significantly better, but I was using a 144 hertz display hooked up with the laptop here, so this higher FPS was something that I could notice. It might not be the case for you if you're only using the internal display. If you're using just the internal display, you're pretty much better off at just 1080p and relying on FreeSync to keep things smooth for you. That is if you actually have the same laptop that I have here, because this laptop actually does support FreeSync. Even though the internal display caps out at 60, it is at least 60 with FreeSync, which means that in a lot of titles, it's actually going to keep you well within a range where everything's going to look super smooth, no screen tearing whatsoever. But the real benefit of 720p really comes into its own when we actually raise the TDP up to 25 watts. In interior areas, our FPS is going to be into the high hundreds, that it's going to be really remarkable to play in comparison to 1080p. Our 1% lows, of course, do see a nice little bump, but it's really the averages that start to just improve, especially as we progress through the level and go into more interior areas where there's just less things that need to be rendered, and it pretty much just lets the FPS go absolutely buck wild here. And really, it was a very smooth result to actually play. Hooked up to a 144 hertz display, this really did feel really nice. The biggest downside is just that the resolution drop is pretty significant and very noticeable when you're on a 24-inch display. Now, if I was just gaming with the internal display, then 720p wouldn't look as bad, but I also wouldn't need to drop down to 720p. The fact that I can actually use a higher FPS monitor and actually get some really nice usage out of it, where our averages are just slowly climbing up as while we're going through these hallways, we are getting hundreds of FPS. It really does feel like a completely different experience in comparison to the other settings. So, I mean, this is a viable option if you're looking to just get a high refresh rate gaming experience out of this Call of Duty game. It's just one of those things where the resolution drop is pretty significant. But anyways, I hope you found this video useful. If you did, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.